Three of his brothers stood beside the coffin. The president prayed there. The parliament speaker prayed there. Iran's entire senior leadership showed up. The one person missing from Ayatollah Ali Khamenei's funeral was his own son and successor, the man who is, on paper, now running the country. And the reason he wasn't there tells you more about the actual state of Iran's leadership than almost anything said at the funeral itself. Over the next 20 minutes, I want to walk through exactly what's known and not known about Mojtaba Khamenei's condition, why Iranian officials made the specific choice to keep him away from even the burial in his father's home city, what this 4-month total public absence means for a country trying to project strength during sensitive ceasefire negotiations, and why ordinary mourners at this funeral are already voicing doubts about a leadership they can't actually see. This isn't just a curiosity about one missing man. It's a live test of whether a government can maintain authority while its own head of state remains invisible. Let's start with the medical details, because they've become gradually more specific over time rather than less. Mojtaba Khamenei was appointed Iran's new supreme leader in early March, succeeding his father, who was killed alongside 4 family members in the American and Israeli airstrike that opened this war on February 28th. According to Reuters, citing people close to his inner circle, Mojtaba's face was disfigured in that attack, and he suffered a significant injury to one or both legs. He is believed to have been seriously wounded in the same strike that killed his mother and his wife. Since that day, according to CNN, he has remained in hiding, communicating with his supporters only through written statements, never once showing his face or using his voice publicly. President Trump himself weighed in on the uncertainty at one point, saying the U.S. wasn't sure if Mojtaba was dead, before later saying he was alive in some form, and expressing hope of meeting him in the future, a suggestion Iranian officials denied. 4 months into his leadership, the man technically running Iran's theocracy has never been seen or heard by the public he supposedly leads. Here's where the story gets more specific and more revealing. According to a New York Times report citing unnamed IRGC members and individuals involved in planning the funeral, Mojtaba had also missed a memorial for his own wife earlier in the same week, before his father's ceremonies even began. The same report states that Mojtaba had actually hoped to attend the burial portion of the ceremonies in Mashhad, but was reportedly advised against it due to specific security concerns that he could be targeted by Israel. That detail matters enormously because it confirms this isn't simply a matter of health or personal grief keeping him away. Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz had explicitly said, in comments reported by the Israeli outlet Ynet just days before the funeral, that Mojtaba Khamenei was marked for death. Iran's own security apparatus made a calculated decision that the risk of their supreme leader appearing in public, even to bury his own father, even to pray beside his own wife's memorial, outweighed whatever legitimacy his presence would have provided. 3 of his brothers, Mostafa, Maysam, and Masoud, prayed beside the coffins on state television instead. Mojtaba did not. The scale of precaution surrounding this funeral gives you a sense of how seriously Iran is treating the threat. CNN reported that Iran announced the complete closure of airspace over Tehran for the duration of the events, and Reuters footage showed security personnel patrolling the streets ahead of the funeral processions. Danny Citrinowicz, the former head of the Iran branch of Israel's military intelligence, told CNN that Iranian authorities are worried about threats from the air and from the ground, and that officials don't want to take any chances, having therefore heavily guarded the event. Notably, Citrinowicz also pointed out that the appearance of other senior officials, such as IRGC Chief Brigadier General Ahmad Vahidi, who had only been photographed publicly for the first time since the war began just days earlier, might actually indicate confidence in the security measures Iran has put in place. If that's true, it makes Mojtaba's continued absence even more pointed. If Iran's security services were comfortable enough to let the head of its most powerful military organization appear in public, but not comfortable letting the actual supreme leader appear even briefly to bury his own father, that's a specific deliberate risk calculation about exactly how valuable and how vulnerable Mojtaba himself is considered to be. Legitimacy. Here's the part of this story that should worry Iran's leadership more than any external threat. Ordinary mourners are starting to say the quiet part out loud. A young woman interviewed by the semi-official Tasnim news agency at the funeral said, "Until the last moment, before the prayer began, I kept telling those around me that I hoped he himself would come. That was our only wish." That's a citizen at a state-organized funeral. on the record, describing her own government's supreme leader as someone she has to hope will show up, rather than someone whose presence and authority she simply takes for granted. Compound that with a separate comment from a 38-year-old mourner named Miramati, who told AFP, "If our leaders are about to proceed with negotiations in this manner, our people will not agree with it." A direct expression of skepticism about the very leadership structure conducting ceasefire talks with Washington. Iran is trying to use this funeral to project unity and strength during sensitive negotiations over the Strait of Hormuz and the war's permanent end. But a supreme leader who cannot appear even at his own father's burial, replaced on camera by his three brothers instead, is not the image of continuity Iran's government presumably wanted broadcast to the world or to its own citizens during the most important diplomatic week of the ceasefire so far. Put this together, and you get a government managing an extraordinarily difficult balancing act. It needs Mojtaba Khamenei's title and bloodline to legitimize continuity of the theocracy after his father's assassination, but it apparently cannot risk his actual physical presence anywhere Israel might be watching. Not at his wife's memorial, not at his father's burial, not anywhere in 4 months. That tension is being absorbed, for now, by his three brothers standing in for him on camera and by state television carefully managing what gets shown. But legitimacy built entirely on a title without a visible person attached to it has a shelf life, and based on what mourners are already saying out loud to journalists, that shelf life may be shorter than Iran's government would like. So here's the question worth sitting with. How long can a country conduct ceasefire negotiations, manage a hostile regional environment, and stage the largest funeral in its recent history, all in the name of a supreme leader who has never once been seen or heard in 4 months of holding that title? Because at some point, the gap between Mojtaba Khamenei's official authority and his total physical invisibility stops being a security precaution and starts becoming a genuine